As many delicious things in life, let's start with onions. No, I'm not cooking some food, although I know that an Ecuadorian flavorful dish usually starts with onions. We even have one called encebollado, which literally translates to soup made out of onions. As my mommy says, cebolla paiteña para el refrito. When cooking, we use the insides of the onion, the meaty, juicy, fragrant layers. Layers that can make you cry, but end up being delicious altogether. This time, however, I'm not using the insides, but the outer protective layers, the ones that get exposed to everything, the ones that keep the insides crisp. Just as this onion, humans also have layers, or innermost protected layers, las que no dejamos que nadie vea, hidden to the public or most vulnerable, covered by outer layers, the ones that everyone sees, the ones we decide to show, the ones we can control. These outer layers accumulate the shock from every scar, mark, and trauma. They get coarser, darker, harshest with time. They store a rich history. These outer layers accumulate the shock from every scar, mark, and trauma. They get coarser, darker, and harshest with time. They store a rich history. These outer layers are what our skin is made of, our protective mask against the world, the fabric of our lives. Just as I used onion skins to dye pieces of unbleached fabric, I also started to experiment with the tannings that avocado skins, avocado pits, cabbage, coffee, wine, and turmeric could provide me. It usually takes a warm bath to release a deep, rich color contained in the skins of certain vegetables. These tannins, that once exposed to a blank canvas, have the power to transform it. While exposing the different pieces of fabric to the different tannings I chose, I realized that they all never resulted in the same color, even if using the same tanning twice. When I was a little kid, my older brother used to say to me, Heráclito dijo, un hombre no puede bañarse 2 veces en la misma agua. I had no clue what he meant. I was 6 years old. It just took me 20 years and some fabric dyeing to understand it. No matter if you are going through the same thing twice, you are always going to experience it differently. I mean, my brother was quite a wise soul. Me, on the other hand, was just living life as it happened to me. Sometimes I prepped my fabrics with a mordant, which is a metallic agent that allows the tanning to adhere better to the fabric. Sometimes people, consciously or unconsciously, have to prep for what is next in our lives to be better able to confront it. I started thinking of how almost 13 years ago I had a thought, almost like a clear vision of what I wanted. I was standing in a staircase of my high school in Ecuador, and while overseeing the school's lawn, I just knew it. I needed to go abroad. I needed to explore beyond what I could see. This is when I knew I was ready to confront what was to come. That moment of clarity was kind of my mordant. Fast forward in time and a whole of new experiences under my belt, I realized how each one of those experiences prepared me for the next one. In my journey, I've met so many incredible people who, like me, have had that moment of clarity that completely changed their lives. I feel that has been the case for many immigrants. We didn't all have the same reasons or conditions to leave, but we had that moment of clarity when we knew it was time to take the next step. Going back to Heraclitus' quote that my brother used all the time, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. In other words, immersion into the same condition doesn't necessarily mean that the result will be the same. When dyeing fabrics, the duration of the immersion into the dye pot also affects how much color the fabric ends up absorbing. Generally, the longer the fabric stays in the dye bath, the stronger the color. Also kind of a metaphor for trauma. The more you have been exposed to trauma, the stronger of a mark it leaves in your life. And it's not only the kind of trauma that I've been exposed to that has changed me. It's also been the time that I've been exposed to that trauma that has impacted me. A little dark. However, what I love about this metaphor is how in fabrics and in humans, trauma doesn't need to define the final product. When observing the fabric, yes, the longer in the dye pot, the stronger their color. But it's so transitory. The moment the fabric is left to dry, it changes color. Sometimes even loses the color it got from the dye pot. Watching the fabric change colors reminded me of hope. I started thinking of the 13 years of my life that I was struggling with an eating disorder. The more I repeated some toxic behaviors, the stronger my need to suppress my hunger and feelings became. When I decided to break the spell of addictive controlling behaviors, I embarked on a healing journey that looked very dark at the beginning. I even told a friend of mine, I don't know if I'll be ever able to heal from this. His response, and something I will never forget, was, people have healed from this disorder in the past and keep doing it as we speak. There's nothing these people have that you don't. You'll get there. A few years later, I was able to close that chapter in my life and come out the other side victorious. My trauma is unique in kind and duration to my experience. But I worked hard in therapy, in community building, and in creating healing art so it wouldn't define who I wanted to be. I am still a little shaky as this memory comes afloat, but with time, too, it lost control over me. Just as the duration of immersion into the dye bath, the drying temperature to which a fabric is exposed to also modifies the color. This was kind of my favorite, to be honest. Remember those red onion skins from the beginning? Well, they turned green after half of an hour inside a dryer blowing hot air. I don't have much to say other than it reminds me of my transformation from a proper quiet ballerina to a progressive queer outspoken artist throwing buckets of paint at herself to denounce the violent colonization of brown bodies. In my life, heat has been correlated to anger. Whenever I feel angry at something that was unfair to me or to my people, I felt compelled to channel that energy into action. As an artist, my way of action against injustice is creation. A phrase that I learned at an anti-racist PSAP training gave me this creative freedom. It's only when we understand what has been done to us that we can heal. The intense heat I feel when I'm angry is what makes me search deeper into the pain, call out the causes of the pain, and after some internal processing, I'm finally able to heal parts of myself. I guess that's when I turn beautifully green, just as this fabric did. As I learn more self-care practices, I'm also learning to use other temperatures of my life as sources of creation. Now, joy, tears, calm, and many more offer me inspiration for transformation. After exposing all these different pieces of fabric to different tannins, mordants, duration of dye baths, and drying temperatures, now I can finally sew them together. As I'm sewing, I'm realizing that, one, sometimes pieces came beautifully together, and sometimes they didn't. So a remiendo or some sort of patchwork was needed, as my mommy used to say. My mom used to spend a great deal of her time zurciendo and remendando my dad's, my brother's, and my socks. She would sit down on the living room couch and with thread and needle in hand, she would darn dozens of socks while watching her afternoon novelas. I remember that on one of those occasions my mom taught me the word zurcir. This is when she told me that not everything needs to be perfect to continue working. Sometimes just a quick darn can be the solution. I also believe this is very ingrained in my culture. We are taught to save and take care of everything we own. This includes repairing it until it is completely obsolete. I mean, sometimes my mom exaggerated a bit and never threw away wool tights full of holes in the knees, but the lesson remained. Sometimes the solution is simpler than we think, and sometimes a little fix is needed to put the pieces together. 2. In sewing terms, there's always a right side and a wrong side. This reminded me of how sometimes our most important identity markers are two sides of the same coin. Not long ago, I was teaching a group of teenagers about identity markers with this activity called Identity Starburst. The activity required us to draw a star at the center. We wrote our names there, and with arrows pointing outwards, we had to write the things that we knew were part of our identity. With arrows pointing towards the center, we had to write things that other people named as our identity. The exercise ended up being an eye-opening activity for my own sake. I had written Ecuadorian as my first and most important identity, and then wrote immigrant as the identity that others associated with me. Two sides of the same coin. I love being Ecuadorian, and because of that, I am always going to be considered a stranger to this culture, hence an immigrant, even when I am enriching myself from its popular culture and creating culture with it. Right and wrong sides, depending from where you see them. Once my protective shield is done, what is next? Hold my breath? Wait? Maybe waiting is not that bad. It helps to think, to gather your thoughts. As I was darning the sides together and covering myself with the fabric of my life, suddenly all the different parts of the process crossed my mind. Did I really spend hours and hours sewing this shield for myself? Yes, I did. The shield was in no way perfect. Remember the quick Zurcier fix that my mom taught me? It now showed. The sides didn't fit at all, and there were a bunch of big openings between the pieces of fabric. But maybe these open spaces are meant to exist for a reason. I first started this project as a way to create revenue for myself. I would dye big chunks of fabric with natural dyes and then make shorts, pants, t-shirts, things that I could sell. The more I dyed fabrics, the more I realized how people, just as a blank unbleached fabric, get affected and changed by every new environment we are immersed into. Every new experience that we go through. With this project, I wanted to honor the different experiences I've gone through and that have shaped me. When collected, these experiences, just as these pieces of fabric, make the fabric of my life, my shield. There is so much one can gain from approaching the world with an outer layer. If anything, this shield has acquired the knowledge from thousands of experiences to protect my inner self from making the same old mistakes, to let me move through the world safely, and to let me discern what and who I let in. But as memories came to me in the process, I realized that this outer layer is actually meant to be surcida, imperfect and with some openings. Flexible enough to let deeper parts of me to shine into the outside world, while letting the love from the surroundings in. Zurciendo Retazos showed me that, even throughout a pandemic, I am more resilient than I thought I was.